I got the most expensive ticket to date ever in that car. So it all kind of started, I've just been a car guy from youth, right? My first car was a 79 Capri RS, dark green, black interior, base, 4-speed, no turbo is the RS package. And of course, when I was a kid, it's like I wanted the turbo, right? Didn't have it. But so my car passion started as a kid, actually, growing up in the country and construction business and stuff. I was making makeshift race cars out of like 55 barrel drum holders. I would turn it upside down so it looked like a roll cage and put tires up next to it and literally just building my own race car. So the passion for cars, mechanicals, and all that stuff was there from the very beginning. Rolled up into high school, milked cows to pay for that first car. After football games, everybody's going and partying and having fun, and I'm going home, going to bed, so I get up at 4 a.m. But, I always had a penchant for unique cars. Everybody you see in the Fox Body Mustangs and all the regular stuff. The first car I wanted to buy when I was shopping for my first car, as a junior in high school, was a 74 260Z in a little bitty small town of Hillsboro, Kansas. Not a lot to choose from. And I saw this old car. I thought, hey, that's an old car. It looks kind of neat. I'm like, well, that should be cheap. And then the dealer, this is in 1986, wanted like $4,500 for this car. And I'm going, this is 10 years older than everything I'm looking at. Why is it double the price? And I did not understand cars at that time. I was driving by, and it's funny that the Z was green, and then the Mercury I saw was green, but drove by and just saw something that caught my eye about it, flipped around. It was $1,400. And I went and got my own loan for the car and paid it off and then rebuilt the motor through shop and all that stuff. So kind of had a real interest in cars. In high school, every time when the magazines would come out, the new Car and Driver, new Motor Trend, all those, I was just grabbing the stacks. Every month it was like Christmas for me, going through the Lotus and the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris and all the tests and the Porsches and all that stuff. And I just absorbed that stuff as a kid of the 80s. We didn't have money, didn't have any support or anything. And I'm like, well, what do you do after high school? You go to college. That's what you do. So I'm like, well, I don't have any money for college. So I actually went into the Army for a 2-year GI Bill. I had the Capri, and then I actually gave that to my future wife. We were high school sweethearts, actually. So she's driving that car through high school. I'm shopping for a car when I get to my final station, and I'm in El Paso, Texas. In the military, there's always deals. People are getting transferred, they're getting out of the military, and so there's fire sales. And so if you got some money laying around, you can find deals. Guy had a 69 Roadrunner, and it wasn't running. I wasn't really fluent on muscle cars, but I liked Mopars. So I'm like, I'm gonna go look at this car, and it had a brand new paint job, slotted mags, new brakes. The car was great, but it didn't run. And, I had shop class. I knew something about mechanics. So I was like, well, how tough can it be? This is just an old muscle car. I've worked on these in shop class. So it had water in the oil. It had mixed coolant and oil. So I gave him $800 for this car. We drug it home. I figured it was maybe an intake manifold gasket or something like that. So we pulled the intake off the car. And lo and behold, the water jackets in the valley of the block, both, I was like, on one side, there's a huge crack in the water jacket. I did not realize that Mopar motors, even back then, are not cheap, and especially being in the military, not having any money. What do you do, right? I'm like, well, it's not a stressed area. It's underneath the intake manifold. There's nothing mating up to it. JB Weld. I took a wire brush and carburetor cleaner and I cleaned the crap out of the block. I layered on, thicker than peanut butter. Just laid on JB Weld on the crack of the block, put it back together, ran a few oil changes through it, and drove the snot out of that car. I drove it back to Kansas to visit Becky. And everywhere I parked that car, I had a note on it. And it was like, I want to buy this car. I got the most expensive ticket to date ever in that car. The first day I got it running, I'm coming off a base. At no tag, no insurance, and of course, I come off base and just ripping, and it got pulled over. It was about $800 exhibition of speed, no insurance, no tags, and it was about $800. And you can imagine me in 1987, a kid in the Army with no money. That one hurt. So finally, I succumbed to the notes. One guy bugged me on that car, and he said, "I'll give you $4,500 for that car." I only had maybe $1,000 in this car. So that was my first, flip, right? And I was like, hey, so I sold that, bought another car here too. So got out of the Army, come back to Wichita, Kansas. Okay, time to start, school, go to WSU, right? Like what am I going to do? I don't know. Engineering, right? I'm thinking engineering sounds mechanical. So I start classes and it's like, wait a minute, this is nothing but math. So it's actually interesting because my wife and we had gotten married. And so I need a job while I'm going to school. So she actually found me a job at a salvage yard. And she's the one that actually found the job. And she's like, hey, somebody needs a job at a salvage yard. You like cars. That might be a good fit. So I'm like, I'll go interview for it. So I start working at the salvage yard. I get a job there. They hire me on the spot, I obviously, just seemed like the right young, fresh face, interested in cars, I guess. So it was kind of interesting. It was a foreign car salvage. He had two locations. He had a Japanese yard, and then he had a European yard. And the big money was in the Japanese yard. That was his focus, and that was, it was a big yard. He had, 15 acres of salvage out there. So pretty good sized yard. He had tons of cars. It was a really cool exposure to cars of that era. So this is like in the early 90s, right? So he's buying all these RX-7s, Mitsubishi Starions, 3000 GTs, all of these super cool 80s cars and early 90s cars, right? I didn't get to see them in the small town that I was in. There wasn't a lot of foreign cars and there wasn't a lot of that type of stuff. So I fell in love with the cars of that era. It's just natural. The owner of the business didn't like European cars. That side of his business, he was unhappy with it. He was complaining all the time about the guys working down there. So I'm like, hey, you know what? If you ever make a change down there, I'd like to go down there and run that place for you. Yeah, okay. He didn't really, just kind of like, yeah, whatever. But I planted that seed. And one day, he calls me up and he says, hey, I need to talk to you in the back room. And I'm like, I don't know I did anything wrong. Like, what have I done here? I'm like, am I getting fired? I'm like, what's going on? So he pulls me in the back room. He says, pack up all your stuff. And I'm like, he goes, you're going down to the South Yard. They call it the South Yard. He says, you're going to go down there and you're going to run that place for me. I'm 20 years old. So I pack up my stuff. I head down there. They'd fired the guy that was managing the place. So there's 2 or 3 guys that were the workers, right? So here this 20-year-old kid walks in, right? And I'm the new boss. For about a week, I just observed. I walked around the yard, kind of got a bird's eye view of the inventory, the system, the parts, and the locations, and all that stuff. And so, and then watched everybody, like what they did and who was working, who was goofing off, So at the end of the first week, I said, okay, well, this is how it's going to be. I told the owner, I was like, well, this guy here, I said, he's just sitting around smoking and drinking coffee and he's not working, right? You're gone. He's gone. And then the other guy quit because he was mad, right? Because his buddy got fired, right? And then the third guy, I'm like, well, he says, you're the boss, let's go. And I hired another guy or two. And in the first month of me operating the place, I tripled the output, the gross income of that location. And then just continued every month to, increase the profitability of the place. Because they just were down there just as good old boys hanging out, only doing what they were requested to do. They weren't really pushing anything. Then comes the next phase, right? I'm going to WSU, but the only thing I really like is like English and racquetball class and mythology and, like these are the only things, I think I took violin class, I was interested in that, but the stuff that like for a career, I was just like, so I did 1 year barely squeaking by to any passing grades, and middle of my second year, I just kind of quit, I'm like, well, that college money, it's good for like 10 years, right? So I'll come back. I planted a seed with the owner that this is the second phase. I said, you know what? You don't really like this European cars. You're not into them. This location is just a thorn in your side. I'm like, why don't you maybe just sell this part of the business to me? He's like, I'll think about it. A few weeks, went by and I just kept kind of putting that in his head. He's like, well, you know what? And in a salvage yard, there's no bank financing, So the only way you're going to be able to take over a business is like an owner finance situation. So, we got to talking about it seriously. And he's like, well, you know what? I'll sell you the business. I'll sell you that part of the business. I'll sell you the business for $100,000, but you got to come up with $10,000 cash down payment. I've got nothing, But in the 2 years that I've been working there, just doing what I do. I had bought a 80 Mercedes 300D that was a vandalism. Then I bought a 1980 Porsche 928 Euro, white with white phone dials. right? And that's a theme for me, is white 80s cars with white wheels. That's kind of like my hot button there. So literally we sold the 928, sold the 300D, sold our TV. You literally sold every single thing we had. I mean, everything we had to come up with $10,000, and did. And so we didn't even have a car, period. But buying the business, right? A beat up, hail damaged. I mean, it looked like it got hit with a baseball bat. This Toyota pickup, it was just their scrap truck. But that came with the business. So I sold every car, and we drove that scrap truck as our personal truck for like a year. I got the business started and became owners in 1991. I'm 21 years old, and now I'm a business owner of Euro-Asian Auto. Something's kind of cool, a little throwback, this shirt right here. I found this in the closet. This shirt's probably 25 years old, and this is our first shirt. And something that's kind of interesting about the name, a lot of people ask about the name. So when I first took it over, it was European Auto. It was tough to make it on a really niche market. So, we were European Auto Incorporated, and I'm like, well, I wanted to start doing some Japanese cars too, just to supplement and have a little diversity. So I literally come up with the name Euro-Asian. I just made a fusion of European and Asian. And back when I did this, that wasn't even a word, and now it's basically a term and a word. I should have, I don't know. A lot of people have stolen this name and are made plays off of it, but I was kind of the first one to make the word Euro-Asian. People always ask us, about our business. Everybody assumes that like I took it over from family, or whatever, someone has handed to us. Well, no, 2 young kids. I was 21 and my wife was 19. And we took this over side by side. We've ran this for 30 years. It doesn't really surprise me where we are now, because we've never given up. It's not been an easy time. There's been a lot of struggles, and it takes time, and it takes hard work, and you can't give up. Even when it gets dark and lonely and tough, those are the times that make you what you are, right? So don't give up, and just keep fighting, and if you do, you can get there.
5 years ago, the first sponsor we ever had here on the VINwiki channel was Caffeine and Octane. Now, they're our local Atlanta cars and coffee meetup that I've been going to for 15 or so years now, but it is now the largest monthly recurring automotive gathering on Earth. Now, you'll also recognize Caffeine and Octane from their television show, and the next season of that airs very soon on Motor Trend. In their quest for further automotive world domination, they just bought the legendary Lanier Motor Speedway, which is across the street from Road Atlanta. So throughout the next year, we're going to have a lot of amazing events there that you'll be invited to join. But the coolest project they've deployed lately is called highoctane.tv, and it's a free streaming network that you can access from any smart TV, Roku, Fire Stick, smartphone, or a computer, and it'll give you access to a ton of programming, including all 5 seasons of their show, some content from creators we love like David Patterson, That Dude in Blue, and a ton more. Soon there will be some content from VINwiki on there as well. So visit the link in the description below to learn more about the amazing world of Caffeine and Octane.